The ridge burned behind me. Smoke clawed my throat while blood ran warm down my arms that I stood over my dying father, dagger shaking in my fist. Then he stepped through the mist, the alpha every pack feared, the one they called merciless. His eyes locked on mine and the world went silent. That wolf lunged inside my skin, desperate, recognizing that he inhaled once, slow, and the scars on his neck matched the ones I'd just given him. That he should have killed me. Instead he seized my wrist and growled one impossible word against my pulse. Mine. Chapter 1. Hey everyone, before we dive in, please smash that subscribe button and drop a like. It really helps the channel grow and keeps these stories coming your way. And stick around to the very end for a special surprise. Alright, let's get started. I hope you love this one. The highlands had grown thick with unease long before the mist rolled in from the lochs. Lyra could feel it in the air, a heavy pall that made her packmates pace restlessly along the ridge. Their breaths came in short puffs, visible in the chill dawn, and the scent of worry clung to their fur like dew on heather. They'd heard the tales for years, warnings from elders about a rival alpha whose name alone sent shivers through the valleys. Thorn, they called him, a leader of unmatched ferocity, said to command shadows as easily as he did his warriors. No one wanted to believe the day would come when his shadow fell over their lands, but here it was, creeping closer with every rustle in the underbrush. Lyra pressed her back against the jagged granite of the crag, her fingers tight around the hilt of her dagger. The wind carried the earthy tang of moss and peat, laced with something sharper, the metallic hint of impending clash. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild rhythm urging her to run, but she stood firm. Flight wasn't an option. This ridge was their ancestral ground, held by her family through countless seasons. Her father, Garrick, stood at the forefront, his broad frame etched with scars from past skirmishes. Silver threaded his dark hair, marks of wisdom and battle, but Lyra caught the faint tremor in his stance, a secret only she would notice. He told her the stories when she was just a pup, his voice low by the firelight. Thorn's pack was relentless, sweeping through territories like a winter gale, leaving submission or ruin in their wake. Back then it felt like legend, a tale to keep young wolves from wandering too far. But Lyra had trained under Garrick's watchful eye, honing her shifts and strikes until she could match any warrior in their pack. Now those skills felt woefully inadequate against the rumors of Thorn's speed, his unyielding strength. A distant howl pierced the mist, sending ice down her spine. It wasn't a challenge, it was a summons, a declaration that the storm had arrived. Her pack tensed, some dropping to all fours as fur rippled across their skin, jaws parting in warning growls. Lyra's throat tightened, she could taste the raw fear everyone fought to bury. What horrors would Thorn bring? Poison barbs? Flanking shadows? Movement flickered in the fog below. Figures emerged, sleek and purposeful, their eyes gleaming like embers in the half-light. They fanned out along the base of the ridge, forming a crescent that trapped her pack against the stone. Lyra's breath hitched as the central figure stepped forward, Torna himself. Even shrouded in mist, his presence dominated, tall and broad-shouldered, with a gaze that cut through the haze like a blade. She'd heard of his piercing stare, but seeing it now sent a jolt of dread through her veins. His jaw was set in grim resolve, each stride claiming the ground as his own. Silence blanketed the ridge. Garrick stepped ahead, clearing his throat to mask his nerves. "Alpha Thorn," he called, voice steady but edged with strain. "We know why you're here. These highlands are ours by blood and bone. We'll defend them if we must." Thorn paused, his sharp eyes raking over Garrick before sweeping the pack. When he spoke, his voice rumbled like thunder echoing off the peaks. "I've come to claim what's owed. Your isolation weakens us all. Refusing alliance invites ruin from the wilds beyond. End this pretense." Lyra felt his words settle like frost on her skin. She glanced at her father, who offered a subtle nod of resolve. Pleas would fall on deaf ears. Thorn was here for dominance. Tension crackled, thick as the mist, until a low growl from behind Lyra shattered it. One of Thorn's warriors lunged upward, claws scraping stone. Chaos erupted. Fur and fangs clashed in a whirlwind of snarls and strikes. Lyra watched in horror as her packmates met the assault, shifting seamlessly to meet tooth with tooth. Her pulse roared, she had to join them. Closing her eyes briefly, she willed the change, bones lengthening, muscles coiling, pain flashing white-hot before fading. In her wolf form, sleek and silver-furred, she bounded into the fray, snapping at any foe that threatened her kin. From the corner of her vision, Garrick battled fiercely, his jaws locked on an enemy's shoulder. Lyra drew on every lesson he'd taught her, dodging and striking with precision. But Thorn was a tempest. He moved with lethal grace, dismantling opponents without mercy. No wasted motion, no hesitation, each blow precise and devastating. In the melee, Lyra saw him pin one of their strongest to the ground, jaws flashing. Blood sprayed the rocks. She stifled a yelp, channeling her fury into a leap at a sneering warrior. Her teeth sank into his flank, forcing him back. She helped her fallen packmate rise, but the victory was fleeting. Thorn's forces pressed relentlessly, their coordination flawless. A pained cry shattered her focus, Garrick's voice. Her heart seized. Shifting back to human form in her haste, she shoved through the tangle of bodies. There he was, slumped against the crag, blood seeping from deep wounds. Above him loomed Thorn, eyes cold as mountain frost. Lyra screamed, the sound lost in the din. Without thought, she threw herself between them, dagger raised, though she knew it was futile. Face to face with the alpha she dreaded, she trembled but held ground. Thorn's expression flickered, surprise, then something unreadable. "Step aside," he commanded, voice a low growl. "No," Lyra spat, voice wavering but fierce. "Not him." He raised a hand to strike, then paused. His nostrils flared, inhaling deeply. Confusion crossed his features. Lyra didn't understand, but time was slipping. Garrick coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Move," Thorn warned, but his tone held less certainty. He tilted his head, eyes locking on hers. A strange heat bloomed in Lyra's chest, primal and confusing, weakening her knees. She blinked it away. In that instant, Thorn seized her wrist. The dagger clattered down the rocks. She gasped, trapped in his grip, but he didn't harm her. Instead, he studied her as if seeing something impossible. The battle raged on, but Thorn signaled his warriors. The assault halted, leaving echoes of whimpers and heavy breaths. Lyra dropped to her knees beside Garrick, pressing hands to his wounds. She glared up at Thorn, expecting the end. But he stood silent, watching. That dawn marked the impossible. Thorn spared Garrick's life, but the pack's fate was sealed. The Highlands were his. Survivors would submit or perish. Yet his gaze kept returning to Lyra. He decided she was his, though he didn't say it. When he pulled her from Garrick's side, she protested. "He needs aid." "My healers will tend him," Thorn replied curtly, nodding to a subordinate. "But you're coming with me." Her mind reeled. Why her? Why spare them? As his warriors escorted her away, numbness took hold. The mist swallowed the ridge she'd called home, now just another piece in Thorn's domain. They led her through hidden paths to a waiting cart, torches flickering. Thorn climbed in beside her, the door slamming shut. The cart jolted forward. In the dim space, his presence overwhelmed, heat radiating, scent of earth and storm filling her lungs. "I know you despise me," he said quietly. "You destroyed everything," she hissed. "Despise is too mild." He looked away. "Your father lives. That's more mercy than most receive." "Why us?" she pressed. He hesitated. There's something about you." The journey wound through shadowed glens. Lyra glimpsed conquered lands, scarred earth, bowed figures. Dread coiled tighter. At last they reached his stronghold, towering stone walls on a craggy hill, torches blazing. Guards parted as Thorn led her inside, ignoring her refusal of his hand. The halls were warm, tapestries of howling wolves under stormy skies. He directed guards to a chamber, simple with a bed and high window. The door locked behind her. Alone, Lyra sank onto the bed, mind spinning. Her home gone, father wounded, pack broken. Yet amid rage, a strange pull tugged at her, a warmth from Thorn's gaze she couldn't shake. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by howls. Chapter 2. The first night in Thorn's stronghold tasted of iron and smoke. Lyra lay on the narrow cot, staring at the single torch guttering in its sconce. Every muscle ached from the fight, but it was the silence that hurt most. No wind through heather, no distant calls of her packmates. Only the low thud of patrols outside the door and the occasional snarls echoing down stone corridors. She had tried the latch 3 times. Solid oak banded with iron. The window slit was too narrow even for a lean wolf. Escape for now was a dream. Footsteps approached, heavy, deliberate. The lock clicked. Thorn stepped inside alone, carrying a wooden tray, bread still steaming, a bowl of stew thick with venison, and a horn cup of something that smelled of honey and herbs. He set it on the small table without a word, then simply looked at her. Lyra sat up, chin high. "If that's poison, you're wasting good meat." A flicker at the corner of his mouth, almost amusement. You'll need strength." "For what?" "To kneel prettily while you parade me in front of your warriors?" He exhaled through his nose, the sound patient and tired at once. Eat Lyra. The use of her name jolted her. Not captive, not female. Her name. She didn't move. He waited a long moment, then turned to leave. That was when she saw it. The fresh claw marks raking down the side of his neck, for parallel gashes still seeping. Her own handiwork from the ridge. Guilt and pride tangled inside her chest. Your healers are slow, she said. They're busy with your father. He paused at the threshold. Garrick asked me to tell you he's awake. The wounds are deep, but he'll live. The relief hit so hard her eyes stung. She swallowed it down. Let me see him. Not yet. When? When I know you won't try to kill me the moment the door opens. He left before she could snarl a reply. The lock clicked again. She ate every bite of the stew. It tasted like betrayal and comfort at once. Hours bled into days. They brought her clean clothes, soft leather trousers, a sleeveless tunic the color of storm clouds. No bindings, no chains, but always 2 guards outside. She was allowed to walk the inner courtyard at dusk, flanked front and back, never close enough to the walls to judge distance. The stronghold was larger than any settlement she'd known. Smithy ringing day and night, training grounds where warriors shifted mid-spar, kitchens that fed hundreds. Everywhere she looked, wolves moved with disciplined purpose. No one jeered at her. They simply watched, curious and wary, as though she were a storm cloud that might break at any moment. On the 5th evening, Thorn came again. This time he carried no tray. Your father wants to see you. Her heart lurched. She followed without a word. They descended spiral stairs into the healer's wing. The scent of salve and blood hung thick. Garrick lay on a cot, torso swathed in bandages, but his eyes were clear. When he saw her, he tried to sit up. She flew to his side and pressed him gently back. Foolish pup, he rasped, but his hand found hers and squeezed hard. You're unhurt. Only my pride. He glanced past her to Thorn, who waited in the doorway, arms folded. Something unspoken passed between the two alphas, old recognition, maybe old enmity. Garrick's voice dropped. He kept his word. My life for the pack's submission. I gave it. Lyra's stomach twisted. You shouldn't have. I'm old, Lyra. You're not. His grip tightened. Survive. That is your duty now. Thorn spoke from the shadows. Time's short. Say what you must. Garrick looked at her a long moment, eyes wet shining in his eyes. Remember who you are, daughter. Blood of the Highlands. Never forget. She wanted to promise rebellion, vengeance, escape. Instead she pressed her forehead to his and whispered, I love you. When they let her out, she didn't look back. If she had, she would have shattered. That night she didn't sleep. Rage and grief circled like twin wolves. At some point the door opened again. She sat up, expecting a guard. Thorn stood there, silhouetted by torchlight. He carried a folded pelt, thick silver-gray fur that looked almost exactly like her own in wolf form. I had it made from the winter catch, he said quietly. The nights are cold here. She stared at the offering. Trying to buy me with pretty furs? No, he laid it on the foot of the cot. Trying to keep you from freezing while you plan how best to gut me in my sleep. A startled laugh escaped her, sharp, unwilling. He heard it, something in his shoulders eased. He turned to go. Why? The question burst out of her. Why spare him? Why spare any of us? Thorn paused, hand on the doorframe. Moonlight from the slit window cut across his face, highlighting the scar that ran through his left brow, an old wound pale against bronzed skin. Because the moment I scented you on that ridge, he said, voice rough, I knew I couldn't kill your bloodline. Not when it's also mine. The door closed. The lock clicked. Lyra sat frozen, heartbeat roaring in her ears. Mate. The word wasn't spoken aloud, but it slammed into her with the weight of mountains. She had always believed the mate bond was myth, an old wives' tale to explain reckless passion. Yet every instinct screamed that Thorn had just confessed the impossible. The ruthless alpha who conquered half the Highlands was bound to her by blood and fate. And he had known since the first moment their eyes met through the mist. Chapter 3. Lyra didn't sleep again. Not truly. She lay beneath the silver pelt he'd left, staring at the ceiling beams until they blurred. The word kept circling, a wolf pacing the edges of a trap. Mate. It explained everything and nothing. The way his scent had punched the air from her lungs on the ridge. The way her body had refused to fear him even when her mind screamed to run. The way he'd looked at her like she was both salvation and ruin. She hated how much sense it made. At dawn the door opened without ceremony. A female warrior, tall, scarred across one cheek, stood there with a bundle of clothes and a curt nod. Alpha says you train with the pack today. Wear these. Lyra took the bundle. Fitted leather armor, lighter than anything her old pack had worn, dyed midnight blue with silver threading at the seams. When she pulled it on, it fit like it had been measured while she slept. Of course it had. She was led to the main yard. Mist still clung to the ground, but the sky above the walls was pale gold. Warriors already circled the training grounds, some in human form, some wolf, some shifting mid-motion. The clang of practice blades and the thud of bodies hitting dirt filled the air. Thorn stood at the center, shirtless, skin gleaming with sweat as he sparred against 3 opponents at once. He moved like violence made fluid, dodging, striking, commanding space without seeming to try. Every time he dropped someone to the ground, he offered a hand up. No humiliation. Just lesson. When he saw her, he ended the match with a sharp whistle. The yard quieted. Lyra of the Highlands, he called, voice carrying easily. Step forward. Hundreds of eyes turned. She felt the weight of them, curious, assessing, some hostile. She walked until she stood 10 paces from him. He tossed her a practice blade, wood wrapped in leather. She caught it by reflex. Show me what Garrick taught you. A murmur rippled through the watchers. This wasn't courtesy. This was a test. She rolled her shoulders, settled into stance. And if I cut you? His smile was slow, feral. Then I'll know you're worth keeping alive. They circled. He attacked first, fast, brutal, no holding back. She parried barely, the shock jarring up her arms. He pressed, forcing her back step by step, blade a blur. She tasted blood where she bit her tongue to stay focused. Then she remembered Garrick's favorite lesson. The Highlands teach patience. Wait for the mountain to come to you. She let Thorn drive her toward the yard's edge, let him think she was faltering. When he committed to a downward strike meant to end it, she dropped, rolled, and came up inside his guard. Her blade stopped a hair from his throat. The yard went dead silent. Thorn looked down at the wooden edge, kissing his skin, then at her. Something hot and approving flared in his eyes. Again, he said, voice rough. They fought until her lungs burned and sweat soaked the leather at her back. Every round she lasted longer, landed more blows. By the 10th, warriors were cheering, for her, not him. When he finally called halt, she was trembling with exhaustion. He caught her wrist before she could lower the blade, thumb brushing the pulse hammering there. Breathe, he murmured, low enough only she heard. You're magnificent. The praise slid under her skin like warm mead. She hated that it felt good. He released her and addressed the yard. Lyra trains with us from today. Anyone who harms her answers to me. A few protests rumbled, quickly silenced when his gaze swept over them. That evening, bruises blooming across her ribs, she was given a new chamber, larger, with a real bed, a hearth, and a window that actually opened. Still locked from outside, but the message was clear. She was no longer prisoner. She was something else. She was soaking aches in a copper tub when the door opened without knock. Thorn stepped in, carrying a small clay jar. Steam curled between them. Peace, he said at her glare. The healer mixed this for deep bruises. He knelt by the tub without waiting for permission, uncorked the jar. The scent of arnica and pine filled the air. His hands, those hands that had torn through her pack without mercy, were suddenly gentle, sliding salve over the purple bloom along her ribs. She should have stopped him. Instead she watched, breath shallow, as his thumb traced a particularly dark mark. I bruised you, he said quietly. You gave me the blade first. A low laugh rumbled in his chest. Still, I should have pulled my strikes. Why didn't you? His eyes met hers, gold and fierce. Because you'd have hated me more if I had. Silence stretched, thick with unsaid things. His hand stilled just beneath her breast, warm through the water. The bond pulled like a riptide, want, need, fury all tangled. She caught his wrist. Don't. He withdrew instantly, but the heat lingered on her skin. At the door he paused. Tomorrow we ride north. Shadow wraiths have been sighted near the old cairns. I want you with me. Shadow wraiths are myth. So was the mate bond until a week ago. He left before she could retort. She sank under the water until her lungs screamed. North. Shadow wraiths. Thorn at her side. Whatever came next, the Highlands themselves seemed to hold their breath. Chapter 4. They left before dawn, 30 riders strong. Mist clung to the flanks of the hills like the breath of sleeping giants. Lyra rode a black mare with a white blaze, Thorn's own mount, handed to her without ceremony. The mare answered her lightest touch as though they'd known each other for years. Another quiet claim. Thorn rode at the head, cloak snapping in the wind, hair unbound and wild. He hadn't spoken since they passed the gates. He didn't need to. Every wolf in the column felt the tension rolling off him, coiled violence wrapped in iron control. Lyra's stomach knotted tighter with every mile. The old cairns lay 3 days north, on the edge of the cursed moor where no pack held territory. Elders said the veil between worlds thinned there, that the shadow wraiths were the restless dead of wolves who died unclaimed by pack or mate. Lyra had always scoffed. She wasn't scoffing now. They made camp the second night in a hollow ringed by ancient standing stones. The stones hummed faintly when she brushed them, low, mournful like a song with no words. Fires were lit small and low, no one wanted to draw attention. Thorn found her at the edge of the circle, sharpening her dagger against a whetstone. "You feel them too," he said. Not a question. The stones? She didn't look up. Or the things that walk between them? Both. He crouched beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Tomorrow we reach the cairns. If the wraiths are truly rising, we burn the barrows and salt the ground. Old law. And if the old law fails?" His profile was hard in the firelight. "Then we die fighting." A humorless laugh escaped her. Comforting. He turned then, eyes catching the flames. "You still think I dragged you here to die?" "I think you dragged me here because you can't leave me behind," she said, meeting his stare. "The bond won't let you." Something raw flashed across his face, too quick to name. Then it was gone. "You're right," he said. "It won't." He reached out, slow enough she could have moved away. She didn't. His knuckles brushed the line of her jaw, calloused and warm. "But I would have wanted you at my side even without it." Her breath caught. The bond surged, hot, demanding, terrifying. She felt it in her bones, her blood, the sudden ache low in her belly. His pupils blew wide, sense spiking with the same hunger. She jerked back first. "Don't." He let his hand fall, but the air between them crackled. That night she dreamed of black water and silver eyes watching from beneath. They reached the cairns at dusk on the third day. The moor stretched bleak and endless, heather bruised purple under a sky the color of old blood. The burial mounds rose like the spines of some immense buried beast, each capped with a single standing stone. Wind keened through the grass, carrying a stench of rot and cold iron. The horses refused to go farther. They dismounted and went on foot. Thorn ordered torches lit. The flames burned blue at the edges. They found the first body just inside the largest barrow. One of their scouts, Rorik, lay on his back, eyes wide and filmed with frost though the night was mild. His throat was torn open, but there was no blood on the ground. Only black frost spreading outward from the wound like spilled ink. Lyra's skin crawled. "Wraiths," someone whispered. Thorn knelt, touched 2 fingers to the frost and hissed. The skin blistered instantly. "Cold iron burns them," he said grimly. "Blades won't be enough." He ordered the pack into a defensive ring. Lyra stood at his left, dagger in one hand, torch in the other. The wind died. The moor went unnaturally still. Then the shadows began to move. They rose from the cairns like smoke-given claws and teeth, tall, wolf-shaped but wrong. Too many joints, eyes like dying stars. The temperature plummeted, breath fogged and froze on their lashes. The first wraith lunged. Thorn met it with torch and iron blade. Blue fire flared where they touched the creature, and it shrieked, a sound that cracked the standing stones. The pack roared into motion. Lyra fought beside Thorn, torch sweeping arcs of flame, dagger seeking the brief moments when iron met shadow flesh. The bond thrummed between them, sharpening every sense. It felt his pain when claws raked his shoulder, felt his triumph when he severed a wraith's head and it dissolved into screaming mist. They were losing ground. More wraiths poured from the earth, dozens, hundreds. The ring buckled. Warriors fell only to rise again, eyes black as pitch, turning on their own. Thorn's voice cut through the chaos. "Lyra, to me." She spun, saw him standing atop the central cairn, blood streaming from a gash across his chest. The largest wraith yet circled him, a thing of nightmare and starlight, wearing the shape of an ancient alpha long dead. Thorn looked down at her, eyes wild. "The bond," he shouted. "It's the only thing they fear. Living mate fire burns colder than their death." Understanding slammed into her. She dropped torch and dagger and ran. Warriors parted. Wraiths lunged, she dodged, rolled, came up inside the cairn circle. Thorn met her halfway, gripped her shoulders hard enough to bruise. "Look at me," he growled. She did. The bond roared open between them like floodgates. Heat poured from her chest to his, from his to hers, until she couldn't tell where she ended and he began. Power, raw, ancient, unstoppable, rose in a tide. Thorn crushed his mouth to hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was teeth and blood and desperation. It tasted like survival. White fire exploded outward from their joined bodies. The wraiths screamed as the mate bond blaze rolled over them, pure living flame against dead shadow. One by one they unraveled, torn apart by light they could not withstand. When the last wraith dissolved, the moor fell silent. Lyra's knees buckled. Thorn caught her, arms iron bands around her shaking body. Their hearts hammered in perfect unison. Around them, the surviving pack stared in stunned awe. The curse was broken. But something else had just begun. Chapter 5. They rode home in silence, not victory but survival. Only 19 of the 30 came back. The dead were wrapped in cloaks and tied across saddles. The moor would not have them. No one spoke above a whisper. Even the wind seemed ashamed. Lyra rode beside Thorn the entire way. Not because he ordered it but because the bond now pulled like a rope around her ribs. If more than a horse length opened between them, her skin itched and her wolf clawed to close the gap. He looked no better, jaw clenched, eyes too bright, one hand always within reaching distance of her reins. They reached the stronghold at dawn on the 4th day. The gates opened without challenge. Word had already flown ahead on faster paws. Wolves lined the walls and battlements, silent, watching the ragged column return. When they saw Thorn and Lyra riding knee to knee, blood-crusted but alive, a low howl rose, grief and relief braided together. Garrick waited in the courtyard, leaning heavily on a crutch. The moment Lyra dismounted he folded her into his arms so tightly she felt his ribs shake. "I thought I'd lost you," he rasped against her hair. "You almost did," she whispered back. Over his shoulder she met Thorn's eyes. Something unspoken passed between them, gratitude, warning, promise. That night the pyres burned on the eastern ridge. 19 flames for 19 warriors. The pack sang the old leaving songs until voices cracked. Lyra stood between her father and Thorn, the three of them shoulder to shoulder, an image that silenced every whisper of dissent. Later, when the fires burned low, Thorn found her on the outer wall walk. Moonlight silvered the scars on his bare torso. The claw wounds from the wraiths had already begun to close, angry but clean. He didn't speak at first. Just leaned on the stone beside her and stared out over the dark highlands. "I was 12 when I first felt the pull," he said at last, voice low. "A hollow ache right here." He tapped his sternum. "Healers told me it was growing pains. Elders said it meant I was destined for greatness. I thought they were all fools." Lyra stayed quiet, waiting. "Then I turned 20 and the ache became a direction. Northwest. Always northwest. I followed it on hunts, on raids, on every campaign. The closer I got, the worse it hurt. Until the day we crested your ridge and I saw you standing over your father with that dagger." He exhaled, shaky. "The pain stopped. Just stopped. And I knew I'd tear the world apart before I let anything take you from me." She swallowed. "You could have asked. Would you have listened?" "No." A humorless huff. "Exactly." Silence stretched, filled only by wind and distant owl calls. "I'm still angry," she said. "I know. I may always be angry. I know that too." She turned to him then. "But I'm also tired of pretending I don't feel it. The bond. All of it." His eyes flared gold. "Lyra, I'm not saying I forgive you for the ridge, or for every territory you burned to claim. I'm saying," she drew a steadying breath, "I'm saying I choose to find out who you are when you're not conquering something." He stared at her as if she'd handed him the moon. Then, carefully as though she were made of glass, he lifted her hand and pressed his lips to the inside of her wrist, right over the racing pulse. "I will spend the rest of my life earning that choice," he said against her skin. Heat pooled low in her belly. The bond hummed, satisfied and hungry at once. She pulled her hand away before it dragged them both over the edge right there on the wall in front of half the pack. "Slowly," she warned, voice husky. He smiled, small, crooked, and the first truly peaceful expression she'd ever seen on his face. "Slowly," he agreed. But slowly lasted exactly 4 nights. On the 5th, a storm rolled down from the high peaks, lightning splintering the sky, thunder shaking the very stones of the stronghold. Lyra woke to the crash of it, heart racing, wolf restless beneath her skin. The door to her chamber opened without a knock. Thorn stood on the threshold, soaked through, white shirt plastered to his chest, eyes wild with storm and want. "I tried," he growled. 4 days of cold baths and dawn runs in every discipline I know. I can't do slow anymore." Lightning flashed behind him, illuminating every hard line of his body. Lyra's mouth went dry. The bond roared between them like the thunder. She rose from the bed in nothing but a thin linen shift. Rain blew in through the open window, misting her skin. "Then don't," she said. He crossed the room in 3 strides, hauled her against him, and kissed her like a man drowning. There was nothing slow after that. Mouths, teeth, hands, desperate, claiming, reverent. Clothes torn away between thunderclaps. Skin to skin at last, the bond flared white-hot, arching their backs and stealing their breath. He lifted her, pressed her to the stone wall, her legs wrapping his waist as naturally as breathing. When he paused, forehead against hers, shaking with restraint, she bit his lower lip. "Mate," she whispered, the first time she'd said it aloud. The last of his control snapped. He drove into her with a guttural sound that was half snarl, half prayer. The storm raged outside. Inside they burned brighter. Later, much later, they lay tangled in the ruined sheets, sweat cooling, hearts slowing to the same rhythm. Rain drummed on the roof like gentle applause. Thorn traced the new mark on her shoulder, his teeth already bruising. "I should have asked," he murmured, guilt flickering. Lyra turned, pressed her own fresh claim into his throat. "You did," she said. "I answered." He laughed, low, wondering, and wrapped her tighter. Outside the storm began to ease. Inside, something fierce and fragile began to grow. Chapter 6. Peace, it turned out, was louder than war. Within a moon cycle the stronghold changed. Garrick's warriors were given quarters in the eastern wing instead of cells. Highland banners, silver wolves on deep green, were raised beside Thorn's black and crimson standard. Joint patrols rode out at dawn and returned laughing instead of bleeding. Children from both packs chased each other through the yards while elders argued over whose turn it was to tell the pups stories by the great hearth. Lyra watched it all from the high table every evening, half stunned, half proud. She had expected resentment. Instead she got cautious respect, then something warmer. Because every wolf in the stronghold had felt the white fire on the moor. They had seen their ruthless alpha drop to his knees in the ashes afterward and press his forehead to hers like she was sacred. Word spread faster than wildfire. The Highlands' lost daughter had bound the unconquered alpha with nothing but her own will. It was a legend they were happy to live inside. Thorn made no attempt to hide the bond. He touched her constantly, small, casual brushes that still sent sparks across her skin, a hand at the small of her back during council, fingers threading through hers when they walked the battlements, a kiss pressed to her temple in full view of the morning drill. The pack law said an alpha's mate stood equal. Thorn acted as though she had always been his co-ruler. It was dizzying. It was also exhausting. Because every night he came to her bed and loved her until she forgot her own name, and every morning she woke terrified that the fragile peace would crack the moment she let her guard down. The crack finally came 6 weeks after the moor. They were in the map room, arguing over patrol routes along the northern river. Thorn wanted to pull warriors back to reinforce the stronghold's granaries for winter. Lyra argued the river villages would feel abandoned and turn to banditry. "We cannot guard every pebble," he said, voice edged with frustration. "And we cannot rule through fear anymore," she shot back. The words hung in the air like a blade. Thorn went very still. "You think I rule through fear?" Lyra's chin lifted. "I think you did. For years. Years." Silence stretched, taut and ugly. Then he turned, slammed his fist into the stone wall hard enough to crack mortar, and stormed out. She didn't see him for 2 days. On the 3rd night she woke alone, sheets cold on his side. The bond tugged, sharp, anxious. She pulled on a robe and followed it. She found him on the highest tower, shirtless despite the frost, staring north as though he could see the moor from here. His knuckles were split and bleeding. Lyra stopped an arm's length away. "You're bleeding on my tower." His laugh was ragged. "It's my tower. Not tonight." He glanced at her, eyes haunted. "I keep dreaming of the wraiths. But this time the fire doesn't come. This time I lose you." The confession cracked something open in her chest. She stepped close, took his injured hand and pressed her lips to the torn skin. "Then stop trying to lock me in a cage of guards and grain stores. Let me help you carry it." He shuddered. "I don't know how to be anything except the wolf who takes." "Then learn," she said fiercely. "With me." He pulled her into him, buried his face in her hair, and breathed her in like oxygen after drowning. They stayed on the tower until dawn painted the sky rose and gold. When they finally went below, his hand was healed, licked clean by her tongue, and the new patrol schedules bore both their signatures. But the Highlands are never merciful for long. 10 days later a rider came at dusk, half dead, horse lathered to collapse. He carried a strip of black cloth tied around his arm, the mark of the shadowed Fong, a rogue pack thought destroyed years ago. His message was simple: they've taken the river villages. They're coming for the stronghold next. And they have a new alpha. The rider died before he could say the name. Thorn stood in the courtyard holding the black strip, face carved from granite. Lyra felt the bond ice over with his rage. Because stitched into the cloth, in thread the color of old blood, was a sigil both of them recognized: a wolf devouring its own tail. The mark of Thorn's exiled younger brother, Cain. The war they thought finished had only been sleeping. Chapter 7. The war council lasted until the torches guttered. Maps were unrolled across the great table like flayed skins. Every scout's report painted the same picture. Cain had not simply survived exile. He had spent 6 years beyond the northern ice, forging an army out of every outcast, feral and broken wolf the highlands had ever spat out. They called themselves the Hollow Pack. They left no prisoners, only blackened earth and sigils carved into the living. Thorn stood at the head of the table, knuckles white on the wood. Lyra stood at his right, hand resting lightly on his forearm, steadying him, steadying herself. Garrick, still favoring his healing side, spoke first. Cain always wanted what you had. Now he thinks the Wraithmore proved you weak, saved only by a mate's fire. He'll come straight for the heart. Thorn's voice was a low growl. Then we meet him on ground of our choosing. Lyra shook her head. He won't give us that courtesy. He'll burn the villages, salt the fields, force us to chase ghosts until we're spread thin. We have to draw him here. Every eye turned to her. Here? One of Thorn's lieutenants scoffed. Invite that madness inside our walls? Yes, she said calmly. Because these walls are stone older than any pack. Because the bonfire still lingers in the stones from the night we burned the wraiths. And because if he wants Thorn, he'll have to come through me first. Silence. Then Thorn's voice, rough with pride and fear. We fortify the stronghold. We evacuate the river folk inside the outer ring. We make him siege us. Garrick's eyes gleamed. And when he's committed every wolf to the walls, we strike from within and without. Old pincer my father used against the ice bears. Plans were made, orders barked, runners sent galloping into the night. Later, when the hall emptied, Thorn pulled Lyra into the alcove beneath the great stairs. His hands framed her face, thumbs stroking her cheekbones like he was memorizing them. If this goes wrong. It won't. If it does, he repeated fiercely, you take the hidden pass behind the moon pool. You ride south until the bond fades. You live. She caught his wrist. Listen well, mate. The only way I leave this place is with you breathing beside me. So stop planning my escape and start planning our victory. He rested his forehead against hers, trembling. Gods, I love you, he whispered, the first time he'd ever said it plain. The words cracked her open and filled her all at once. She kissed him back against the stone and kissed him until they were both shaking with it. I love you too, she said against his mouth. Which is why we're going to gut your brother and dance on his corpse at dawn. He laughed, raw, incredulous, alive, and kissed her again. 3 nights later the Hollow Pack came. They poured out of the northern dark like a tide of shadow and teeth. Thousands. More than any scout had guessed. Cain had been busy. They ringed the stronghold but did not attack immediately. Instead they howled, one endless, splintered note that scraped the soul. Inside the walls, children whimpered and clung to mothers. Warriors gripped iron blades already wrapped in salt-soaked cloth. Thorn and Lyra stood atop the main gate. Moonlight silvered them both. At the forefront of the army, a single wolf stepped forward and shifted. He looked almost exactly like Thorn, same height, same brutal shoulders, but where Thorn's eyes burned gold, Cain's were black glass. A scar split his face from hairline to jaw, Thorn's mark from the night he'd been exiled. Well, brother, Cain called, voice carrying easily. I see you found yourself a pretty leash. Thorn's snarl rattled the gate timbers. Cain's gaze slid to Lyra. And you, little Highland bitch. They say your fire saved him once. Let's see if it can save him twice. Lyra smiled, slow and sharp. Come find out. Cain raised one arm. The Hollow Pack attacked. Chapter 8. The first wave hit the walls like black water breaking on stone. They came in wolf form, in half-shift, in twisted shapes that should never have existed. Ladders of bone and sinew slammed against the battlements. Arrows tipped with cold iron hissed through the night. The air filled with the screams of the dying and the wet crunch of jaws meeting flesh. Lyra stood on the eastern tower, bow in hand, silver-fletched arrows singing from the string. Every one found a throat. Below her, Thorn moved along the wall like a storm given muscle and teeth, ripping attackers from the ladders and hurling them to the rocks 30 feet down. Blood painted his chest and arms, some of it his, most of it not. The bond burned between them, bright and vicious, feeding strength back and forth. She felt his exhaustion, his fury, his terror that she might fall. He felt her calm, her focus, her absolute refusal to lose him tonight. Hours bled into one another. The moon crawled across the sky, indifferent. They held the outer wall until the stones themselves seemed to weep red. Then Cain played his hand. From the rear of the hollow pack rose a new howl, low, wrong, ancient. The temperature plummeted. Frost spider-webbed across the battlements though no snow had fallen. Lyra's stomach dropped. Shadow wraiths. Not the ragged remnants from the moor, but dozens, hundreds, summoned and bound by some dark bargain Cain had struck beyond the ice. They flowed up the walls like smoke, untouched by arrow or blade. Warriors screamed as cold iron passed through shadow flesh and the wraiths kept coming. One leapt straight at Lyra. She dropped her bow, shifted mid-fall and met it with teeth and claws. The bonfire flared along her fur, white and searing. The wraith shrieked and unraveled, but more poured in behind it. Thorn roared her name from across the wall. She felt him fighting toward her, carving a path through bodies and shadows alike. They met back to back on the widest parapet, human again, breathing hard. Blood ran from a gash above his eye. Frost blackened the edges of her left hand where a wraith had grazed her. "They'll overrun us in minutes," he panted. "No," she said. "They want the bonfire. They always have. Living mates burn them worse than salt or steel." Understanding flashed between them. He cupped her face, slick with blood and sweat. Together then. Together. They kissed once, hard, desperate, tasting copper and smoke, then turned to face the tide. Hand in hand they opened the bond wide. Power answered like the sky splitting. White fire exploded outward from their joined bodies, rolling down the walls in a perfect circle of living flame. Every wraith it touched screamed and burned to nothing. The hollow pack wolves caught on the edge of it howled in agony as the mate bond seared the darkness right out of their blood. For one breathless heartbeat the night went silent. Then Cain's voice rose, cracked with rage. "Archers, take the female." 100 bows lifted as one. Thorn spun, shielding her with his body. The arrows flew. Lyra felt the first one punch through his shoulder before she heard the impacts. The second took him high in the back. The third would have pierced his heart if she hadn't twisted at the last second, shoving him sideways. They fell together, tangled, sliding down the inner slope of the battlement into the courtyard. Lyra landed on top, hands already pressing the wounds. Blood poured hot over her fingers. "Thorn, look at me. Stay with me." His eyes were glassy, gold fading. "Cold?" he whispered. "No. No, you do not leave me, damn you." She pressed her mouth to his, forced the bond open again, poured every ounce of strength she had into him. Behind them the gates shuddered. Cain's wolves had reached the inner keep. Garrick's voice bellowed across the yard, "To the Alpha! To the Alpha's mate!" Hundreds of boots pounded stone. Lyra didn't look up. She was too busy dragging Thorn toward the great hall, leaving a trail of crimson. Warriors formed a living shield around them, blades flashing, buying seconds with their lives. Inside the hall she slammed the doors and dropped the bar. Torches still burned from the earlier council. The great hearth roared. She laid Thorn on the long table, ripped his shirt open. 3 arrows. One through the shoulder muscle, one dangerously close to the lung, one buried deep in his lower back. Tears blurred her vision, but her hands were steady. She snapped the shafts, yanked the heads free. He convulsed, teeth sinking into his own forearm to keep from screaming. "Stay awake," she ordered. "That's an order from your mate." A ghost of a smile. "Bossy." She pressed both palms over the worst wound and reached for the bonfire again. This time she didn't push it outward. She pulled it inward, knitting flesh, sealing arteries, burning infection before it could take root. Minutes or hours later, she no longer knew, the bleeding slowed. Thorn's eyes cleared. Color returned to his face. Outside, the doors shuddered again. Wood began to splinter. He gripped her wrist. "Lyra. The hearth." She understood instantly. The great hearth had stood since the first stones were laid. Legend claimed it had been kindled with the original mate fire of the stronghold's founders. They staggered to it together. She shoved the iron cauldron aside, revealing the ancient stones beneath, blackened by centuries of flame. Thorn sliced his palm, then hers. Their blood mingled, dripped onto the stones. They spoke the old words together, voices raw but sure. "By blood and fire, by bond and breath, we claim this hearth and all it guards." The hearth answered. Flames erupted, white and blinding, roaring up the chimney and out into the night sky like a pillar of judgment. Every wraith still inside the walls shrieked and burned to ash. Every hollow wolf still fighting felt the bonfire sear through Cain's dark bindings. Hundreds dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, suddenly free, suddenly themselves again. The gates burst open at last. Cain strode in alone, blade dripping shadow. His black eyes fixed on them beside the blazing hearth. "Pretty trick," he sneered. "But fire can't save you from family." Thorn stepped forward, placing himself between Lyra and his brother. "Family," he repeated, tasting the word like poison. "You stopped being that the day you tried to murder me in my sleep." Cain smiled, all teeth. "And yet here we are." He lunged. Steel met steel in a shower of sparks. Lyra circled, dagger ready, but this was older than pack law. This was blood calling to blood. They fought like gods and demons, too fast for any other blade to follow. Cain was faster than memory, crueler than winter. Thorn fought with everything he had left, every wound, every scar, every year of guilt and rage. Cain's blade opened a line across Thorn's ribs. Thorn's fist cracked Cain's cheekbone. They slammed together, grappling, knives lost, teeth and claws and hatred. Cain pinned Thorn against the hearthstones, hands around his throat. Lyra moved without thought. She grabbed Cain's wrist, twisted and shoved. The momentum carried all three of them into the white flames. For one eternal heartbeat there was only fire. Then Cain screamed, a sound torn from the root of the world, as the pure mate fire judged him and found him wanting. His body burned from the inside out, shadow and flesh unraveling into black ash that scattered across the flagstones. When the flames died back, only Thorn and Lyra remained, kneeling in the embers, arms wrapped around each other, alive. The war was over before the sun rose. Chapter 9. The aftermath tasted of ash and pine smoke. For 3 days the stronghold did nothing but burn its dead. 19 from the Wraithmoor. 211 from Cain's siege. The eastern ridge became a forest of pyres. The wind carried the scent of mourning for leagues. Lyra did not cry in public. She stood beside Thorn at every ceremony, hand locked in his, face carved from granite. Only at night, when the last torch guttered out and the pack finally slept, did she let the tears come. Then she curled into his chest and shook silently while he held her like the world might still try to tear her away. On the fourth dawn the sky broke open with the first snow of winter. It fell soft and relentless, blanketing blood and scorch marks alike. Children ran laughing through the courtyard, trying to catch flakes on their tongues. Their joy felt obscene and necessary at once. Thorn found her on the northern wall, watching the white silence settle. "I thought snow would feel cleaner," she said without turning. "It doesn't." He came up behind her, wrapped his cloak around both of them, chin resting on her hair. "Nothing will ever wash it all away," he murmured. "But spring always comes." She leaned back into him. "Do you believe that?" "I have to." They stood like that until their eyelashes were rimed with frost. Later that day the surviving hollow wolves, those who had dropped their weapons when the bonfire freed them, were brought Cain's second-in-command in chains. A gaunt female named Vera, half her face burned away by the hearth flames. She knelt in the snow before the great hall steps and bared her throat without being asked. "I followed madness," she rasped. "I have no pack. No name. Do with me as you will." Lyra looked at Thorn. He looked at Lyra. Then Lyra stepped forward and cut the chains herself. "You have a name," she said. "And you have a choice. Swear to these lands and to the wolves who defend them, or walk north and never return." Vera stared, stunned. Around her, the former hollow wolves waited, hardly daring to breathe. One by one they knelt, not in submission but in exhausted gratitude, and swore. The pack grew by 400 souls before sunset. Winter closed its fist. Snow piled against the gates until tunnels had to be dug. The granaries held barely. Hunters ranged far under Garrick's old routes and came back with elk and mountain goat. Children learned to shift in the great hall when blizzards made the yards impossible. Elders told stories of the white fire that ended a war, and the silver wolf who stood equal to the black. Lyra's belly began to round just after the solstice. She noticed it one morning when her leather belt refused to buckle. Panic flared, then wonder, then a fierce, protective joy that brought Thorn to his knees in the armory when she told him. He pressed his forehead to the slight curve beneath her tunic and stayed there so long the armorers pretended to be very busy on the other side of the room. "A pup," he whispered, voice cracking. "Or two," she teased, fingers threading through his hair. "Highland blood is stubborn." He laughed, wet, broken open, happy, and kissed the spot like it was sacred. They told Garrick that night by the hearth. The old wolf stared, then pulled them both into a crushing embrace and did not let go until Lyra squeaked that the pup was being squashed. Spring arrived sudden and fierce. Snow turned to torrents that roared down every gully. Heather burst purple across the hills. The river villages rebuilt roofs and planted barley in soil enriched by the ashes of war. On the first warm evening, Thorn and Lyra rode out alone to the ridge where it had all begun. The grass had grown tall and sweet over the blood. A single rowan tree had taken root where Garrick had fallen that dawn long ago, its leaves shimmered silver in the breeze. They dismounted and stood hand in hand. "I used to hate this place," Lyra said quietly. Thorn squeezed her fingers. "And now?" She looked at him, at the scar through his brow, the new white streaks at his temples earned in a single winter, the steady gold of his eyes that no longer carried hunger for conquest. "Now it feels like the beginning," she said. He pulled her close, palms spread over the swell of their child. "Beginning?" he echoed, voice rough with wonder. Far below, smoke rose from the chimneys of a stronghold that belonged to 2 packs and 1 people. Wolves ran the walls on evening patrol, black and silver fur catching the last light. Above them, the rowan leaves whispered in a language older than names. And for the first time in centuries, the highlands knew peace. Chapter 10. Summer ripened fast and hot. The barley turned gold, the locks steamed under midday sun, and every wolf in the stronghold seemed determined to make up for a winter of grief with a season of pure, reckless life. Pups wrestled in the shade of the new rowan grove that had sprung up along the eastern wall. Elders napped in the sun like old lions. Lovers disappeared into the heather and came back hours later with grass in their hair and stupid grins. Lyra's belly grew round and heavy. She cursed the heat, cursed the stairs, cursed Thorn every time he tried to carry her anywhere, then kissed him senseless the moment they were alone again. He, in turn, became quietly, hilariously overprotective. He sniffed every piece of meat that went onto her plate. He growled at anyone who walked too fast near her. Once he threatened to throw the blacksmith into the forge for accidentally bumping her shoulder while fitting a new gate hinge. Lyra solved that by dragging him into the hayloft and riding him until he forgot how to speak. "Better?" she asked afterward, breathless and smug. He could only nod, dazed, hay in his hair and claw marks down his back. The pack watched it all with fond amusement. Their fierce alpha reduced to a besotted, hovering mate was apparently the best entertainment the Highlands had offered in years. Then, 3 weeks before the harvest moon, the dream started. Lyra woke night after night drenched in sweat, the echo of a pup's cry in her ears. Always the same, a storm over the ridge, white fire flaring, and a small silver pup with Thorn's gold eyes standing alone while shadows reached for its throat. She told Thorn on the 4th night, voice shaking. He listened without interrupting, then pulled her against his chest and held her until the trembling stopped. "It's only fear," he murmured into her hair, the bond amplifying every worry. But the dreams kept coming. On the 7th night the pain came with them. It started low in her back while she was helping Garrick sort seed grain for next year. A dull cramp, then a sharper one that stole her breath. She straightened slowly, one hand pressed to her belly, and felt warm wetness slide down her thighs. Not 3 weeks early. No. She found her voice. "Father." Garrick took one look at her face and roared for the healers. Chaos, calm, efficient chaos took over. Thorn burst into the storeroom like a storm, eyes wild until he saw her. Then he went deathly pale. "It's time," she told him, trying to sound brave. He scooped her up before she could protest and carried her through corridors suddenly lined with worried, hopeful faces. The birthing chamber had been ready for weeks. Fresh straw, boiled water, bundles of raspberry leaf and shepherd's purse, the hearth blazing. 3 midwives waited, 2 from Thorn's pack, 1 from hers, plus the old healer who had saved Garrick's life the day of the conquest. They chased Thorn out twice. He paced the corridor like a caged beast until Lyra, between contractions, snarled, "If you don't get in here and hold my hand, I swear I'll shift and bite you." He came in, knelt at her side, and did not let go for the next 7 hours. The pain was a living thing, huge and ancient, rolling through her in waves that left her gasping. Thorn wiped her face, fed her ice chips, whispered praise and love and nonsense in her ear. When she lost track of time, of everything except his voice and the pressure building to a bright, unbearable crescendo. Then suddenly, a new cry split the air, thin, fierce, indignant. A girl. Tiny, red-faced, fists flailing, with a shock of black hair and, when she opened her eyes, 1 gold, 1 silver. The room went still. The midwives stared. Garrick, who had been allowed in at the last moment, let out a sound halfway between laugh and sob. Thorn looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Lyra reached for the pup with shaking arms. The moment their skin touched, the bond flared, bright, new, different. A second heartbeat, smaller but already strong, braided itself into theirs. Thorn pressed his forehead to Lyra's, tears cutting clean tracks through the sweat and blood on his face. "Hello, little storm," he whispered to their daughter. They named her Rowan, after the tree that grew where blood had once soaked the ridge. But the highlands, as always, were not done with them yet. 3 nights later, the storm from Lyra's dreams arrived. It came down from the north like vengeance. Black clouds, wind that howled like wraiths, lightning that split the sky open. The moment the first thunder cracked, Rowan began to scream, a sound of pure terror no newborn should be capable of. Lyra jolted awake, heart hammering. Thorn was already on his feet, naked, eyes glowing in the dark. "They're here," he said. She didn't have to ask who. The last of Cain's lieutenants, those who had fled when the hearth fire consumed their alpha, had spent the spring regrouping in the high passes. They had waited for the longest night of storm to mask their scent. And they had come for the child born of the bond that ended their master. The attack was small, silent, surgical. 6 wolves in half-shift scaled the northern wall where the new stone was still raw. They killed 2 sentries before the alarm howl rose. Thorn met them in the corridor outside the birthing chamber, sword in one hand, claws in the other. Lyra, still weak, still bleeding from birth, stood over Rowan's cradle with a dagger in her fist and murder in her eyes. The bonfire answered before steel could. It poured out of them both, raw, new parent fierce, and rolled down the hallway in a wave of white flame. The intruders had time for one startled yelp before they burned to cinders where they stood. When the pack arrived seconds later, weapons drawn, they found only Ash and their alpha and his mate standing guard over their sleeping daughter, eyes blazing with the same dual-colored light as the pups. No one spoke of separating them again. Ever. Chapter 11. Years folded like mist over the locks. Rowan grew wild and bright, a whirlwind of silver fur and mismatched eyes that saw farther than any pup should. She learned to shift before she could walk steady, to track a deer by scent before she could read, to swing a wooden sword with her father's precision and her mother's grace. The pack called her the Stormborn. She called the stronghold her playground and every wolf in it her personal guard. Lyra watched her daughter with a heart too full for words. Some days she still woke reaching for the dagger under her pillow, half expecting the howl of wraiths. Then Rowan would barrel into the chamber, laughing, and the shadows fled. Thorn aged into something gentler without losing an ounce of steel. The white at his temples spread, but his hands stayed steady, his laugh came easier. He ruled with Lyra's counsel at every turn, no more solitary decrees, no more conquest without consensus. Territories that once bowed in fear now sent envoys with gifts and trade offers.
Garrick lived to see his granddaughter's 5th solstice. He passed in his sleep one autumn night, smile on his face, hand curled as though still holding a tiny fist. They buried him beneath the rowan on the ridge, and the tree bloomed crimson the following spring like it mourned and celebrated at once. Rowan asked questions no child should need to ask. Why did grandfather's pack fight Papa's? Because people are stubborn and afraid, Lyra told her, braiding her hair by the hearth. But love is stubborner. Rowan considered this, gold eye narrowed, silver one thoughtful. Will I have to fight? Only if someone tries to take what's yours, Thorn said from the doorway, voice soft. And even then, you'll have choices we never did. The girl nodded solemnly, then ruined it by shifting into a gangly pup and tackling his legs. Life settled into rhythms, dawn patrols, midday training, evening stories. The bond between Lyra and Thorn deepened into something quiet and unbreakable. No longer a wildfire, but the steady glow of embers that never quite went out. Then, on Rowan's 10th harvest moon, the envoy arrived. He came from the Western Isles, for salt-crusted, eyes the pale blue of sea ice. His pack had held those islands, since before the highlands had names. They sent no tribute, asked no alliance. Until now, he knelt in the great hall, offered a carved whalebone box, and spoke with the weight of oceans. A sickness walks our shores. Wolves waste away, eyes clouding to milk, for falling in clumps. Healers call it the pale curse. It spares no one, pup, elder, alpha. We have tried every herb, every rite. Nothing slows it. He opened the box. Inside lay a single black pearl, veined with silver. This came from the deep trenches. The old songs say only mate fire pure enough to burn wraiths can cleanse a curse born of the sea's anger. We heard what you did on the moor. We heard of the child born with storm in her veins. Lyra's hand found thorns under the table. Rowan, perched on the bench between them, leaned forward, eyes wide. The envoy looked directly at the girl. We begged the Stormborn's aid. Silence rang like a bell. Rowan glanced at her parents. Lyra saw the question there, adventure or burden. Thorn spoke first. "She's 10, and the curse has taken half our pups already," the envoy said, voice breaking. Lyra closed her eyes. She felt the bond tug, not fear but duty. The same pull that had dragged her from captive to co-ruler. She opened her eyes and looked at her daughter. "What do you say, little Storm?" Rowan sat straighter. "I say we help, but I want to learn how first." The hall erupted in murmurs. Thorn's grip on Lyra's hand tightened until bones creaked. Training began at dawn the next day. Not with swords or claws, but with fire. Lyra and Thorn stood with Rowan in the old cairn field, now a meadow of wildflowers, and taught her to open the bond without fear. To pull the mate fire gentle instead of explosive. To shape it like clay instead of letting it rage like lightning. Rowan was a natural. Terrifyingly so. By the third day, she could summon a steady flame in her palm that burned cold white and didn't scorch the grass. By the 7th, she could send it dancing across the meadow like a living thing, touching flowers without wilting them. Thorn watched with pride and terror in equal measure. "She's stronger than both of us." Lyra swallowed. "Then we teach her control before power." They sailed west on the longest day. The isles rose from the sea like the spine of some great drowned beast, cliffs black and sheer, waves crashing white. The envoy's pack met them on the shore, gaunt, hollow-eyed, but hope flickering like their last torches. The cursed wolves were kept in sea caves to spare the healthy. Rowan walked in without hesitation, parents flanking her, the envoy trailing. The air stank of rot and despair. Rowan knelt by the first sick pup, no bigger than her torso for patchy, eyes filmed white. She placed a small hand on its brow. "Easy," she whispered. "I've got you." White fire flowed, gentle, precise, a river instead of a flood. The pup's eyes cleared. Fur thickened before their eyes. It whimpered, licked her wrist, and slept. One by one, Rowan healed them. Not with exhaustion or pain, but with the effortless grace of a child who had never known a world without miracles. When the last wolf rose whole and strong, the island pack fell to their knees and wept. They offered everything. Pearls, boats, loyalty eternal. Rowan asked for a seashell necklace and a promise to visit every summer. They gave her both and named her Seabond in their songs. The journey home was quiet, the sea calm under a sky full of stars. Rowan slept between her parents on the deck, shell necklace clutched in one fist. Thorn's arm around Lyra's shoulders, her head on his chest. "We made something better than peace," he said softly. Lyra smiled into the dark. "We made hope." Far behind them, the isles lit bonfires that burned all night. Ahead, the highlands waited, green and gold and endless. And in the cradle of the bond that had once felt like chains, 3 hearts beat in perfect, unbreakable rhythm. Chapter 12. 53 winters after the night the hearth burned cane to ash, the highlands still tell the story around every fire. They say that on the longest night of the year, when the wind comes down from the north carrying frost and starlight, you can climb the ridge above the stronghold and hear it. One perfect, endless howl that is 3 voices braided into one. Lyra, Thorn, Rowan. The Stormborn never took a single mate. Instead, she carried the white fire into every corner of the known world, healing curses, breaking tyrants, teaching pups born centuries after the war that strength and mercy are the same word in the old tongue. When she finally felt the years settle on her bones, she returned home, built a small stone house beneath the great Rowan on the ridge, and spent her last decades training the next generation of fire-bearers. Thorn outlived almost everyone who had ever feared him. The fierce black alpha became the gentle silver elder who sat on the gate each dawn, telling outrageous stories to wide-eyed pups while sharpening knives he no longer needed. His hands shook only when Lyra was out of sight for too long. The bond never dimmed, not even a little. Lyra's hair turned the color of moonlit snow, but her eyes stayed sharp and dangerous. She ruled beside Thorn until the day she decided ruling was boring, then handed the mantle to Rowan and spent her time wandering the hills with her mate, hunting for the sheer joy of running side by side. They died within hours of each other, the way true mates do. It was a soft spring evening. Rowan found them in the Rowan Grove, sitting shoulder to shoulder on the grass, backs against the oldest tree, hands still linked. Thorn's head rested on Lyra's shoulder. Her cheek lay against his hair. Both were smiling, as though they had simply decided the view was perfect and it was time to go home together. The pack howled for 7 days and 7 nights. they burned no pyres. Instead, they carried the bodies to the highest cairn, laid them side by side beneath a blanket of heather and rowan berries, and sealed the entrance with a single stone carved with their joined sigil. A silver wolf and a black entwined in endless circle. Within a year the cairn was covered in flowering vines. Within 10, the rowan grove had spread until it ringed the entire hill. Within 50, saplings from those trees were growing in every pack's courtyard from the western isles to the eastern ice. And still, on the longest night, the ridge sings. Travelers swear that if you stand quiet beneath the moon and listen with your heart instead of your ears, you will hear them. A low, steady note, thorns rumble, warm as hearthstones. A bright, fierce harmony above it. Lyra's laugh turned to music. And threading through both, wild and clear as wind over water, the high, fearless